Shalom, family. So this lesson I'm going to be reading from a book called Afro-Asian Culture Studies. This book was written by Erwin Rosenfeld, and it's a 4th edition, and it's published in 1979. So first I want to say, sometimes when you look in some of these older books, you can get, more truth than what you can find in these newer books, right? Because these newer books, a lot of the publishers have some sort of agenda that they want to push, right? But the older books usually is written straight, written plain, right? Not in all cases, but, So let me just read a little bit from Afro-Asian Culture Studies. Let's start with, the title is The Jews and Judaism. And this is under Middle East history, Middle East and North Africa. So the Jews and Judaism, the ancient Hebrews. About 1400 BC, a group of people called Hebrews moved into the land that is now called Israel. This land, which was formerly known as Canaan or Palestine, is a small, fertile region located between the Arabian Desert and the Mediterranean Sea. These people were shepherds, and it is believed that they came from Mesopotamia, in brackets Iraq. And remember, in the Bible, it said that Abraham came from Ur of the Chaldees, right? In the Mesopotamia area. They came in search of water and new land. After reaching Palestine, they settled down, became farmers, set up a government, and began to develop as a nation. Under King David and King Solomon, ancient Israel reached its greatest glory. Trade was carried on with distant lands, wealth poured into Israel, and Solomon built a magnificent temple in Jerusalem. But the Hebrew nation lasted only a short time before it was destroyed by outside enemies. Right? We know that in 70 AD, Israel was sacked by the Romans, right? The Hebrews, or Jews as they were later called, were scattered over the entire world, right? And we know that they were scattered by slavery. However, during the few hundred years that the Hebrews lived in Palestine, they developed ideas which influenced other civilizations. The ideas about God and man, which the Hebrews put into the Bible, live on today not only in the religion of the Jews, but in Christianity and Islam as well. Okay, the Hebrews and God. The Hebrews were the first people to believe in one God. Other nations before and after the Hebrews continued to believe in many gods, which were connected with the forces of nature, sun, moon, rain, trees. In the beginning, the Hebrew religion also involved the worship of many gods. Well, there's no proof about that. But gradually, the idea of one God developed. The Hebrews called their God Yahweh, or the Tetragrammaton, YHWH, Yahuwah, and believed that he created man and the entire universe. The belief in one God is known as monotheism. The Hebrews believed that their God demanded strict obedience. God made his demands known in the 10 Commandments, which he gave to Moses on Mount Sinai. Yahuwah was a jealous God, and his first commandment was, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." But the Hebrew God was also a loving father who looked upon men as his children whom he protected. The Hebrews believed that God had made a covenant or agreement with them. God promised that if the Hebrews obeyed his commandments, he would be on their side and protect them. The Bible tells many stories which shows how God protected his people. According to one story, God asked Abraham to sacrifice his only son Isaac. As Abraham laid Isaac on the altar and took the knife to slay him, an angel appeared telling him not to touch his son. For now I know that you fear God. God then promised that Abraham's descendants would multiply and be victorious over their enemies. Thereafter, the Egyptians who pursued the escaping Hebrews were drowned in the Red Sea. David defeated Goliath, and the Hebrews were able to conquer Canaan and create a Hebrew state. Okay, the ideas of justice and righteousness. The God of the Hebrews demanded worship, but not worship alone. God was much more interested in man's ethical behavior. God was just and demanded justice of his people. He was righteous and he demanded righteousness of his people. After the Hebrews settled down and gained wealth and power, many people began to worship other gods. Then the prophets Elijah, Jeremiah, Amos, and Isaiah came on the scene to keep the faith in Yahweh's alive by condemning the worship of other gods and by saying, "The Lord is one." But the prophets were also concerned with man's relation with his fellow man. The prophets claimed that God was not interested in sacrifice and offerings, but in justice and right living. The prophets spoke out against the oppression of the poor by the rich and the powerful. They criticized the kings for living in luxury while the people suffered. The prophets said that God would punish those people who had strayed from the path of righteousness. And when the ancient Hebrew state in Palestine was destroyed by powerful neighbors, well, that's talking about the Romans, the prophets explained this by saying that God was punishing the Hebrews for their wicked ways. Thus, for the first time in history, religion was combined with ethics and morality. The other people of the ancient world believed that by offering sacrifices, they could make their gods happy. These gods could bring rain and make the sun shine, but they were not concerned with the affairs of men. It was the Hebrews who believed that man was responsible for his fellow men and that God demanded righteousness of his people. It is because of these ideas, the Hebrew faith has had such a powerful influence on the rest of the world. So just speaking on that, what I just read, that's all that's written about the ancient Hebrews. And I just wanted to say that, this that's all that's written about the ancient Hebrews. But in the pictures that it shows, it only shows the 1948ers or the small hats. Those people that I'm talking about in the Middle East right now. It only shows images of those people. So it's talking about the ancient Hebrews, but it's trying to conflate them and confuse the reader into believing that the Hebrews of the Bible and the people who call themselves Israeli are one and the same, but that's not the case. As I said before, this book is written by Erwin Rosenfeld, right? So that tells you he's a member of that group, the 1948ers or small hats, right? So that's the reason for that slant, that version of history, right? So I just want to look through and so it talks about okay. Now here's in the Middle East section. There's also a part about the Islam and the spread of Islam, right? So let me just read a little bit of that. As you know, the Hebrews of the Bible, those were our people, and so were the Moors who came and conquered Europe. Those were our people as well, right? So let me just read. So this book is trying to confuse people because first it has one section that says Middle East and North African history, right? And then it says Sub-Saharan African history. When these they're trying to, by saying Middle East and North African history, they're trying to show it as it's a different group of people, right? But when we're talking about that, we're talking about this is all so-called Black history, right? Let me read this part. The spread of Islam. Until the 7th century AD, the people of Arabia had never played a large part in the development of the Middle East, living in an area that was mainly desert. Most of their time was spent looking after their flocks and wandering in search of water. In the 6th century, the Arabs had not yet reached the high level of civilization that the Hebrews, Egyptians, and other people in the Middle East had reached centuries earlier. However, in the 7th century, inspired by the teachings of Mohammed, the Arabs suddenly came to life. In their search for converts to the new religion and economic gains, the Arabs swept over Persia, Mesopotamia, Palestine, Egypt, and North Africa. They conquered one settlement after another. In the West, Arab armies conquered Spain, right? So we know the ones who conquered Spain, those were the Moors. Those were our people. They swept across south and central France until they were finally stopped at Tours in the famous Battle of 732 AD. Although stopped in the West, the Arabs continued their successes in the East, extending their power into Central Asia and later into India and Southeast Asia. Within a century after Muhammad's death, the Arab Empire extended from the Atlantic Ocean into the west to India in the east. How were the Arabs able to conquer and rule so vast an empire? First, the Arabs were magnificent warriors. Muhammad had taught that any Arab dying in battle while fighting to spread Islam was assured entry into heaven. This made the Arabs fearless in battle. Their life in the desert gave the Arabs a toughness which easily defeated all who stood in their way. Second, after the poverty of desert life, the possibility of gaining rich and fertile lands only encouraged the Arabs to fight harder. Third, many people found it easy to become Muslims because Islam did not discriminate against people on account of their race. Finally, the Muslims were very tolerant rulers and allowed the Christians, Jews, and other people to continue their way of life and follow their own religion. Contributions of the Arabs. All right? So listen to this. When it's talking about contributions of the Arabs, this is talking about what the Moors brought to Europe, right? Listen to this. For the next 500 years, Muslim civilization far surpassed that of Europe. Historians have used the words magnificent, splendid, and brilliant to describe the civilization of the Muslims during this time. No other people contributed so much to learning during this period as did the scholars and scientists of the Muslim world. The luxury and wealth that existed in the Muslim lands was unknown in Europe. The book Arabian Nights gives a good description of the splendor of Baghdad, which was the capital of the Muslim world from 750 to 1258. Around the bazaars were merchants who brought fabulous carpets from Persia, silks from China, steel from Damascus, cotton from Egypt, leather from Morocco, spices and dyes from India, ivory, gold, and slaves from Africa, honey, wax, and white slaves from Russia. Industry and commerce prospered. And did you catch that? White slaves from Russia. So that's talking about the Slavic people, because that's the first word for slave in that language is Slav, the Slavic people, right? The cultural contributions of the Muslims were tremendous. This was partly due to the generosity of the caliphs who welcomed artists, writers, scholars, and scientists to their courts and encouraged them in their work. The Muslims had an ability to recognize what was best in other cultures, adopt it, add to it, and then pass it on to other people. The Muslims were especially influenced by the philosophy and science of ancient Greece and India. Most of the outstanding Greek writers were translated into Arabic. This learning was improved upon and later transmitted by the Muslims to Western Europe. The Muslims made important advances in medicine. Various diseases were diagnosed and described, including measles and smallpox. All the medieval knowledge of the day was collected and published in several huge encyclopedias. The first drugstores and schools of pharmacy were set up. Druggists and doctors had to pass an examination. Hospitals were built throughout the empire. Physics and chemistry also progressed under the Muslims. To advance the study of astronomy, they developed good astronomical instruments and built observatories. Most of their knowledge of mathematics came from the Hindus in India. No, I don't believe that to be true. This knowledge included the numbers we use today. See, when it says this book says most of their knowledge of mathematics came from the Hindus in India, we know that isn't true because we know that Abraham was learned to build, and he I believe he learned from Enoch, right? And so the Israelites, they knew how to build, and so these Muslims, they were Israelites who converted to Islam, right? So they already knew mathematics and they knew how to build. This knowledge included the numbers we use today, but since it was the Arabs who introduced these numbers to Western Europe, they are commonly referred to as Arabic numbers. The Arabs made great progress in algebra, which itself is an Arabic word. Because of their trade with distant lands, as well as their pilgrimages to Mecca, the Muslims became the most important geographers of the time. A great deal of geographical knowledge was collected and maps were printed. The Muslims made important contributions to literature as well. Arabs have always had the special gift of storytelling and poetry. The Arabic language itself is suited to colorful tales about life in the desert or palace. Hundreds of poets created poems of great beauty. The one most known in the West was the Persian poet Omar Khayyam. The Arabian Nights is a collection of tales that is quite popular all over the world. Many histories were written during this period. Arab historians specialized in biographies of Muhammad and other important Muslim leaders, accounts of the spread of Islam and the world histories. In art, the two fields in which the Muslims excelled were architecture and the decorative arts. Beautiful mosques were built with spacious interiors, large domes, great pillars, and arches to provide Muslims with dignified place in which to pray. Beside the mosques, the Muslims built large palaces, of which the most famous is the Alhambra in Granada, Spain. Right? And when I went to Spain, I saw the Alhambra Palace, right? Beautiful patterns from flowers and geometric figures were used to decorate the interior of mosques and palaces. Skilled craftsmen produced rugs, pottery, tiles, and metalwork of original and delicate designs. Okay, I want to talk a little bit. This next section talks about the Middle East in decline. Okay, now here's the Crusades. From 1097 to 1291, the Christians in Europe tried to reconquer the Holy Land from the Muslims. The coastal cities of Palestine, parts of Syria, and Turkey were captured by the Christians. During this period, Muslim rulers made alliances with Europeans against other Muslims. Finally, the famous ruler of Egypt, Salah al-Din, was able to reunite enough territory and in 1187 to defeat the Christians who were driven from Jerusalem. During the 200 years of warfare, there was considerable destruction in the Middle East. Right? In general, as the Christians in Europe grew stronger, they began to expand at the expense of Islam. Areas such as Spain, which had been part of the Muslim world, were gradually taken over by the Europeans. Periodically, over a period of several hundred years, various groups of nomads invaded the Middle East and North Africa and caused tremendous destruction from which the area never recovered. In the middle of the 11th century, nomadic Arabs invaded North Africa, destroying the land and the irrigation system. This was never repaired, and as a result, farming seriously declined. So yeah, that's the book. This book, my father had it in his library, and I just wanted to read a little bit about the history of the Israelites and a little bit about the history of the Moors. So, to the Israelites out there, keep enduring, keep the faith, keep in these scriptures, keep in constant prayer. Shalom, Kwam Yasharallah.